Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping into the world of Regency courtship, a time where love, or the pursuit of it, was an intricate dance full of rules, expectations, and a little bit of cheeky charm. Picture yourself in a grand ballroom, flickering candlelight, casting soft shadows, a fresh floral scent hanging in the air, and whispers of gossip echoing off the walls. Sounds dreamy, right? But here's the catch. You probably wouldn't survive this. In the Regency era, the rules of engagement were so precise and complicated that even the most well-meaning gestures could land you in hot water. You might find yourself tripping over social boundaries, or worse, earning the dreaded label of unfit for marriage simply for making one wrong move. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time. Let's see where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. It's always fun to know what time zone we're sharing this little historical moment in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Regency era, lasting from 1811 to 1820, wasn't just a time of grand balls and romantic novels. It was a world where love, relationships, and marriage were as calculated as any business deal. Sure, we romanticize it with images of delicate dances and whispered promises in moonlit gardens. But the reality was often a lot more about family obligations and social maneuvering than it was about love. The whole idea of dating didn't even exist as we know it. Instead, courtship was a carefully structured process that involved the entire family, especially if you were in the upper class. If you wanted to meet your future spouse, your family had to approve, and even better, they likely had someone picked out for you well in advance. Let's start with the first player in this game, the family. If you're imagining a carefree love affair full of whispered words and stolen kisses, think again. Your parents, and especially your mother, were your gatekeepers to the world of courtship. They kept a close eye on potential suitors, scrutinizing everything from social standing to family wealth and even reputation. You didn't just fall in love with anyone, you fell in love with someone who fit the social bill. This system was a well-oiled machine of matchmaking, and it wasn't just a fleeting trend. It was, in fact, vital to the social fabric of Regency society. For example, if a young woman was being introduced to society, her family had already mapped out a plan for her, often involving multiple suitors over time, to see who best fit the family's social aspirations. Now that we've got family involved in the courtship game, let's zoom in on the next big player, the marriage proposal. You'd think proposing marriage would be a moment of intense passion and heartfelt emotions, right? In the Regency era, though, it was more like a high-stakes game of chess, complete with rules, strategies, and a whole lot of paperwork, well, metaphorically speaking. The proposal itself wasn't the moment of romantic spontaneity we might imagine today. Instead, it was the culmination of months, even years, of carefully calculated interactions. If you were a man seeking to propose, you couldn't just blurt out your feelings like you might in a rom-com today. No. You had to earn your moment. But first, let's set the stage. Picture this. A young man has his eye on a lady of the realm. He knows she's the one, but before he even thinks about proposing, he has to secure approval from her parents, mostly her father. This was a serious business transaction after all. You weren't just marrying a woman, you were marrying her family. That father wasn't just a passive bystander, he was an active participant in ensuring that his daughter made the right choice, socially and financially. So the man would often approach the father first, asking for permission to even begin courting his daughter. If that wasn't enough to make you sweat, there was still the question of how to actually ask for her hand in marriage. It wasn't as simple as, "Will you marry me?" It was a bit more involved than that, sometimes involving formal declarations in the presence of not just the lady, but her family, and on occasion, their friends. Public scrutiny was a big part of the process. You didn't just declare your love, you made a strategic move in the public eye, and a failed proposal could be disastrous. You could go from a man with prospects to a man with a reputation, and not in the good way. Some historians argue that this formality might have stifled genuine emotions, turning courtship into a game where love was secondary to social maneuvering. Was it love, or just the fulfillment of duty? In some cases, both parties could feel little more than a vague fondness for one another, but the arrangement was acceptable as long as the social contract was met. Imagine an actress like Keira Knightley playing Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. Her character, and many others of the time, would find themselves navigating a world where love was secondary to rank and reputation. And don't even think about rushing things. If a man proposed too quickly or without proper gestures of respect and planning, he would be immediately dismissed as desperate or inconsiderate. So when it finally came time to propose, a young man would typically present himself in the most proper manner possible. He might write a letter of intent, outlining his intentions and giving his potential bride's family time to consider the request. While some might think that proposing marriage in this manner lacked any real romance, in its own way, it was a romantic gesture that showed seriousness and respect. By the time the proposal actually came, there had been an established understanding between the couple, built through subtle flirtations, polite dances, and thoughtful conversations. When a couple was ready for the proposal, they had already created a world of their own within the confines of courtly decorum. Of course, no one said the proposal was foolproof. Even after the formal request, the lady had the final say. But here's the kicker. A rejection could have major consequences. It wasn't just a personal disappointment. It was a blow to a man's reputation. His social standing could take a serious hit. Women, on the other hand, didn't necessarily have to worry about their reputations as much. They were often expected to give an answer that was polite, but not necessarily enthusiastic. Historians still debate whether these elaborate proposals were the result of love or just rigid societal norms designed to maintain order and decorum. Was it a true test of love, or a display of control over emotions to maintain social propriety? Some argue that these rituals helped maintain order in a society that was both rigid and prone to scandal, while others believe it left little room for spontaneous emotions or authentic relationships. Regardless of the debate, proposals in the Regency era were less about grand, impromptu gestures and more about navigating the narrow path laid out for you by family, tradition, and societal expectation. But there were exceptions, of course. There were always outliers, those who managed to squeeze out a moment of genuine affection amid all the formalities. Let's explore that delicate balance between what was expected and what was truly felt. and how it manifested in the heart of Regency courtship. All right, now that we've tackled the formalities of proposals and parental permissions, let's turn our attention to one of the most vital aspects of Regency courtship, the art of the letter. Now I know what you're thinking. How exciting can writing a letter be? But hear me out. In an age before text messages and Instagram DMs, letters were the main vehicle for expressing affection, intention, and, let's be honest, a fair bit of romantic manipulation. If you were in the game of courting, a well-crafted letter could make or break you. Imagine you're a gentleman in the Regency era. You've met a charming lady, maybe danced a waltz or two, and now it's time to let her know just how much you care, without making a fool of yourself. What do? Well, you don't just scribble something on a scrap of paper and hand it over casually. No. You write a carefully composed letter, one that's elegant, polite, and most importantly, indirect. You couldn't just come out and say, "I love you." No, that would be far too forward, too gauche. Instead, you might begin with something like, "It is with the deepest respect that I am compelled to share my sentiments." The formality was everything. It was a way of showing that your intentions were pure, your love was earnest, and your social standing was above reproach. In fact, the Regency era was obsessed with the art of letter writing, and women were equally skilled at this delicate art. A lady could receive dozens of letters over the course of a single season, each one carefully dissected and analyzed, often by her mother, before being sent a reply. Even the tiniest misstep in tone or phrasing could lead to scandal, or worse, rejection. So a lady's letter could be just as strategic as the gentleman's. She, too, had to balance affection with propriety, passion with restraint, all the while adhering to the carefully defined boundaries of courtship. Too much enthusiasm could make her look desperate. Too little could make her seem cold or indifferent. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Gifts. What were the most romantic gestures of the day? Why, the gift of choice wasn't some expensive ring. No. It was often something simple, yet loaded with meaning, like a lock of hair or a handkerchief embroidered with your initials. These gifts weren't just tokens, they were symbols of your attachment, though more often than not, they were practical and meant to be kept out of public view. The act of giving and receiving such gifts was an unspoken contract that demonstrated serious intent, signaling that the relationship had progressed beyond mere flirtation. If you were on the receiving end of a gentleman's letter, you could expect nothing less than a formal declaration, perhaps beginning with the polite, "I hope this letter finds you well," before it slipped into more intimate matters. And oh, how those words would be read and reread over and over, with all the excitement of opening a secret message, especially when the letter came with a personal touch. A smudged ink, a pressed flower, or even a tear would send the lady into fits of excitement, each signifying that her admirer wasn't just following the rules, but putting a little extra effort into winning her heart. As you can imagine, public scrutiny played a huge role in these exchanges. A misstep in writing or the wrong tone in a letter could lead to embarrassment. If the contents were deemed improper, they could ruin the relationship and leave the recipient with a tarnished reputation. Even if the letter was perfect, there was always the lingering question of timing. Did the gentleman wait long enough between letters? Was his reply too quick implying desperation? Was his letter too formal, making him seem detached? Historians still debate whether this intricate web of letter-based courtship actually made things easier or just made love unnecessarily complex. After all, could a couple who only communicated through letters really experience true romance? Or was it just a display of how well they followed the rules? However, despite the formality of the written word, there was a freedom in these letters that allowed lovers to express what they could not say aloud. There was a delicate tension between what was written and what was left unsaid, and often it was that unspoken element that held the most meaning. Some letters were filled with tender affection, while others were so subtly crafted that they seemed to speak volumes without saying much at all. To this day, some historians and scholars have examined these letters as they would a lost language, decoding their meanings and what they reveal about Regency-era society's values. But even in this highly regulated world of courtship, spontaneous moments of genuine emotion would sometimes slip through the cracks. Yes, there was a lot of strategy involved, but behind it all, there was often a very real desire for connection, one that couldn't be completely hidden by formality and decorum. Let's now look at the more socially orchestrated aspects of Regency courtship that were just as integral to the process. As we delve deeper into the nuances of Regency courtship, let's now focus on a vital component of the dating scene: dancing. If you thought a romantic date was all about dinner and a movie, think again. In the Regency era, dancing wasn't just a fun way to spend the evening. It was a social contract, a chance to assess your potential match, and more importantly, a place to showcase your suitability for marriage. You might think you're stepping into the ballroom for a graceful waltz or a lively quadrille, but trust me, you're actually entering the dating battlefield. Imagine you're a young woman debuting at your first grand ball. Your parents have spent weeks preparing for this moment. Every detail has been planned out, from your outfit to your mannerisms, and now the time has come to show yourself in front of society. But it's not just about looking pretty and graceful, it's about how you dance, because in this era, a dance could say more than any words ever could. Each movement, each step was carefully scrutinized. A well-executed waltz could signify poise and elegance, while stumbling or failing to follow the rhythm could imply that you weren't fit for the higher echelons of society. The stakes were that high. But here's the kicker. Dances weren't just about the couple's chemistry, they were about public perception. Regency couples, particularly in higher society, didn't just dance for themselves, they danced for the spectacle. The ballroom was an arena of sorts, where your social status was broadcasted to everyone in attendance. You weren't merely performing for the person you were dancing with. You were performing for everyone watching. Each waltz, each graceful curtsy, each bow was a signal to the crowd. Look at me. I'm desirable. I'm worthy of attention. Now imagine being a young gentleman. You've spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that your every step will be watched. And the pressure doesn't stop with the first dance. There's an unspoken rule that during each event, the gentleman was expected to secure a certain number of dance partners, especially the most eligible ladies. If you failed to secure these partners, your status would take a hit. It was about projecting confidence and charm, showing your worth not just as a dancer, but as a suitable match. And there was one more thing to consider: timing. If you danced too soon with someone, it could be seen as a sign of desperation. If you waited too long, it could signal disinterest or a lack of options. The dance itself was a carefully curated experience, with every partner having a role to play. For the ladies, the dances were often a reflection of their status, who they danced with, and how they danced signaled everything from their family's social standing to their potential as a wife. For the men, the dance was an opportunity to demonstrate their own prowess, both in the social and physical sense. Imagine having to balance elegance, charm, and the ability to remember a complicated routine, all while making the right moves to impress your potential suitor. You had to dance not just with your feet, but with your reputation. Historically, the waltz was considered scandalous by some. The close proximity of the dancers, the way they were expected to hold each other in an intimate embrace, was seen by many as improper. In fact, there were more than a few conservative critics who felt the waltz was too suggestive for the high society of the Regency period. But despite the criticisms, the waltz ultimately triumphed, becoming the defining dance of the time. Its romantic, sweeping motions were symbolic of the rising importance of personal affection in marriage, even in a society where much of courtship was dictated by family and social expectations. Historians still debate whether the dances of the Regency era were truly an expression of growing romantic sentiment, or whether they were merely a reflection of a society that enjoyed controlled intimacy, a way to test the waters of attraction without ever fully diving in. But either way, dancing was an integral part of Regency courtship, offering a space where people could express their interest in a manner that adhered to the unspoken rules of propriety. The ballrooms of the Regency era were not just places for fun and frolic. They were the very stages where romantic careers were made or broken. And the beauty of the dance wasn't just in the movement. It was in the opportunity to communicate with subtlety without ever saying a word. So let's take a moment to reflect. If you were in this scenario, how would you navigate the social dance of courtship? Would you embrace the spotlight, or would you shy away from the expectations? Now that we've explored the social dynamics of dance and how it played a part in love affairs, let's shift focus to something just as important, but perhaps a little more private: the power of a first impression. The first impression, that magical moment when you're sizing up a potential suitor or being sized up yourself. In the Regency era, first impressions weren't just about looking good or saying the right things. They were a finely tuned exercise in social performance. If you were a young woman attending your first ball, you'd know that every detail was scrutinized, from the way you held your fan to the perfect angle of your smile. Your first impression was, in many ways, your introduction to the world. And trust me, you'd want to make it count. Let's break this down. When you stepped into the ballroom or social gathering, it wasn't just about mingling with people. It was about securing your place. You weren't just another guest. You were an eligible candidate, a potential match, and every glance, every movement you made was calculated to signal your worth. A confident posture, an engaging smile, and an ability to navigate conversation with both grace and ease were essential. But here's the trick. All of that had to be done without appearing to try too hard. There was an unspoken rule that you had to appear effortlessly perfect, as though being desirable was the most natural thing in the world. For the men, the first impression was equally critical, though it came with its own set of expectations. A gentleman had to project confidence and class without ever seeming arrogant. If a man was too eager to introduce himself to a lady, it could suggest desperation. If he was too aloof, it might signal disinterest or, worse, a lack of appeal. A lot was riding on these first moments. If a man didn't make the right impression, he could find himself relegated to the background, dismissed as unworthy of further attention. A gentleman had to not only impress with his manners and wit, but also with his family's social standing. And even after that initial connection, his actions would continue to be watched closely. But here's the kicker. The first impression wasn't always about the immediate connection. It was about potential. If a suitor or a lady managed to capture attention in those first few moments, it didn't mean they'd won the game just yet. Instead, it meant they'd earned a second glance, a second opportunity. First impressions were interviews for your social status, and a good one could keep your name in the conversation for the entire season. That meant, even if you weren't instantly smitten, you were still worthy of consideration. If you stumbled, however, the chances of recovery were slim. It was like being given a brief window of opportunity to show that you were worthy of love and marriage. And if you didn't nail it, you could find yourself socially sidelined. It wasn't just about what you said either. It was about what you didn't say. In the world of Regency courtship, subtlety was king. To be too forward in expressing your feelings or intentions could turn a potential suitor into a scandalous figure. So while you might be dying to shout from the rooftops how much you like someone, you couldn't. Well, at least not yet. Instead, you had to be careful with your words, choosing them with the precision of a practiced dancer. A look here, a carefully timed compliment there, perhaps even a slight, barely perceptible touch of the hand. These subtle exchanges held more power than anything verbal. The first impression was more about signaling that you knew how to behave, and more importantly, how to behave in a way that drew attention without seeming desperate. Let's pause for a second and consider a quirky tidbit. The concept of a debutante, a young woman making her public debut into society, wasn't just about a formal introduction. It was a strategic move, a calculated performance where a debutante could in a single evening make or break her reputation. Debutantes were paraded in front of society, often with their mothers and family members standing by, and the way they navigated their debut could determine their romantic prospects for the rest of the season. No pressure, right? Historians still argue whether the overwhelming pressure placed on first impressions on both men and women led to more successful marriages, or whether it merely set the stage for social performances where love was secondary. Was courtship about genuine connection, or was it just a series of well-executed performances for an eager audience? Now that we've explored the power of first impressions, it's time to shift gears and talk about the dangers of hasty marriages. Let's see why rushing into a relationship, especially in the world of Regency romance, was never as romantic as it might seem. As we explore the intricate world of Regency courtship, it's time to talk about one of the most dangerous traps that young lovers could fall into: the hasty marriage. We've all heard stories about whirlwind romances that seem to defy logic and prove that love can conquer all, but in the Regency era, rushing into marriage was often viewed with skepticism and for good reason. If there was one thing that society made clear, it was this: take your time. Marriage wasn't just about romance, it was about securing your future, your reputation, and your place within the social order. And doing that too quickly, well, that could lead to disaster. Let's picture the scenario. You're a young woman, and maybe you've just met someone who stirs your heart. He's charming, handsome, and seems to look at you in a way no one ever has before. The chemistry is undeniable, and you can't help but imagine a future with him. The ballrooms are buzzing with excitement, and your heart is racing just thinking about the possibility of saying yes to his proposal. But here's the catch. Rushing into marriage was a huge no-no in the Regency era. Everyone, from your parents to your peers, would be watching you, and any signs of haste would be read as recklessness or worse, desperation. It wasn't just about making the right choice.